My cousin falsely accused me, got me disowned, stole my college fund, now she's dying and admitted she lied. But my family still wants me to stay. I was 18 when my cousin, let's call her Jade, turned my whole world upside down by falsely accusing me of something awful, sexual assault. The worst part? My entire family believed her without question. Jade is 4 years older than me, and when we were kids, we used to be pretty close. But like a lot of childhood relationships, we drifted apart as we grew up. She's my uncle's daughter, my mom's younger brother. He raised her on his own after his marriage fell apart. Now, my uncle married young, mainly because his girlfriend at the time got pregnant. But things didn't last between them. She cheated on him, and not long after that, the marriage ended. For a few years, she tried to stay in touch with Jade, but eventually, she packed up and moved away with her new boyfriend. From what I know, Jade hasn't heard from her since. My uncle, he was a good man. The quiet, proud type. He never asked anyone for help, no matter how hard life got. As a single dad, he devoted everything he had to raising his daughter right. He was so committed to Jade that he never even tried getting into another serious relationship after his divorce. Not until Jade was legally an adult at 18. He did everything for her. Paid for everything. Saved up a college fund. Took care of every little thing she needed growing up. But when she said she wanted to continue her education past college, go for her master's, maybe even a doctorate, he told her that he'd done all he could financially. He said from that point on, she needed to stand on her own 2 feet, and that he had to start thinking about his own future in retirement. Honestly? I thought that was totally fair. She was old enough to work by then. If she really wanted to keep studying, she could find a way to pay for it like the rest of us do. But Jade didn't see it that way. She felt like her dad owed her more, like he should keep paying for as long as she wanted to stay in school. They fought about it constantly. After every blow-up with her dad, Jade would show up at our house. She'd go straight to my mom to vent and cry and complain. She never really talked to me about it, which was fine by me. I didn't think it was my place to say anything, even though I quietly thought my uncle was being totally reasonable. Then one evening, Jade dropped by unannounced, nothing new there. But this time, my parents weren't home. I don't remember exactly where they were, probably out at some party or dinner. All I know is I was the only one at home when she rang the bell. As soon as I saw her, I told her my mom wasn't around, thinking she'd probably head back home. But instead, she let herself in and plopped down in the living room. She said she just needed to get away from her dad again, they'd had another big fight. By then, I'd heard enough of their arguments to last a lifetime. Whenever she talked to my mom, she made sure the whole house heard it. But with mom gone, Jade decided to unload all her frustration on me. I think she expected me to react the way my mom usually did, to comfort her, maybe take her side. But I had a different perspective, and I didn't feel like pretending. So, I cut her off mid-rant and told her straight, my mom might have played along with her version of things, but I didn't agree with her at all. I told her that her dad had sacrificed everything for her, his time, his money, even his chance at happiness. And now that she was grown, it was time for her to step up. If she really wanted that higher education, then she needed to work for it like everyone else. I reminded her she was studying STEM, and with a degree like that, she'd have no problem finding a decent job to support herself. She kept saying it would be too much to handle working and studying at the same time. I shrugged and told her that if she had already made up her mind that it was impossible, then maybe she needed to accept that further education wasn't for her. What wasn't fair was expecting her dad to keep footing the bill when he'd already done more than enough. Instead of being grateful, she was painting him out to be some kind of villain. She clearly wasn't ready to hear that. Her face twisted in anger, and she started yelling, called me a horrible person. Said I was some spoiled brat who didn't deserve all the support I had. Funny thing is, in my eyes, she was the one acting entitled. But I kept my mouth shut on that. She screamed at me for a few more minutes, then stormed out of the house in tears. I didn't go after her. Honestly, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just another one of her dramatic outbursts. What I didn't see coming, what I never could have imagined, was what she did next. The very next day, everything changed. Early that morning, my parents came into my room and shook me awake. I can still remember it like it happened yesterday. It's burned into my memory because it was, without a doubt, the most traumatic day of my life. They told me that my uncle and Jade were downstairs and that it was urgent. I had no idea what was going on until I walked into the living room and saw Jade already mid-breakdown, screaming, crying, putting on one hell of a show. She was claiming that I had assaulted her the night before. Said I'd taken advantage of her when she came over and my parents weren't home. My uncle looked shattered, completely heartbroken, and my parents, they couldn't even look me in the eye. Jade kept acting like she couldn't even talk, just sobbing uncontrollably, so my uncle was the one doing all the explaining. He told my folks that when Jade came home after their fight, she was inconsolable. Eventually, after hours of crying, she confessed what had happened. She told him that I'd lured her in while the house was empty, and then did what she was now accusing me of. I tried to speak up, tried to defend myself and say it wasn't true, but nobody would listen. I swear I didn't do it, but nobody would listen to a word I said. It was like I was shouting into a void, completely invisible in the eyes of the people I loved most. Even though I was innocent, everyone had already made up their minds. They were looking at me like I was some kind of monster. Right there in front of me, my parents, my own mom and dad, started apologizing to my uncle. They were begging him not to go to the police, pleading with him not to make this public. They promised to do whatever it would take to make things right. The whole time I was standing there, trying to speak, trying to explain, but it was like I didn't even exist. They kept talking around me, like I wasn't in the room at all. The more they ignored me, the more it felt like I was losing my mind. Out of sheer frustration, I grabbed a vase from a nearby table and hurled it at the wall just to get their attention. Well, that didn't go the way I hoped. My dad snapped. He stormed over, grabbed me by the arm, and dragged me to my room. He shoved me inside and locked the door behind me like I was some kind of criminal. I pounded on that door until my hands were sore and bruised. I couldn't just let Jade get away with it, this huge, damaging lie. What she said could ruin a life, and honestly, it nearly did. But my dad didn't let me out until Jade and my uncle had already left the house. When he finally unlocked the door, I broke down in tears. I begged them to hear me out, to believe me. But they wouldn't listen. They said they'd checked the security footage from our outside cameras and saw that Jade had come over the night before, then ran out crying just a few minutes later. Based on that alone, they decided she must be telling the truth. They told me, why would Jade lie about something so serious? My dad looked me dead in the eye and said he was ashamed of the son he had raised. My mom couldn't even speak, she just sat there crying. Then my dad told me that, after hours of pleading, they'd convinced my uncle and Jade not to press charges. But of course, there was a price. In exchange, they promised I'd be sent away, far away, so Jade wouldn't have to see me again or be reminded of the trauma. So, after all their talks, my dad decided I'd be moving in with my great-uncle, the one who lives out in Loa. Now, this man, he was not exactly what you'd call family-friendly. He had a nasty attitude, a bad temper, and was the last person on earth I wanted to live with. And my dad knew that. But apparently, that made it the perfect punishment. He told me there were no other options, I had to accept it. As if that wasn't enough, my parents told Jade they'd also be handing over the college fund they'd set aside for me. Just like that, everything I had worked toward, everything I had planned, was handed to her, to keep things quiet. I tried to speak up, tried to fight back, but it was useless. They weren't hearing me, and honestly, it felt like they didn't care. Eventually, I just gave up. What was the point? If even my own parents thought I was guilty, what chance did I have? I started piecing it all together, realizing that Jade probably made up the whole story as leverage, something to hold over my parents so she could get what she wanted. Her own dad would never accept financial help from anyone, not even his own sister. But my parents? They were desperate to make this go away. A few days after that nightmare, I was packed and ready to go. No one hugged me goodbye. My parents didn't even say a word to me those last few days. It was like I'd already vanished. I was stuck at home, under what felt like house arrest, so I couldn't even meet with my friends to say goodbye. They'd taken away my phone too. Told me that if I didn't drop off the face of the earth, they'd go public with everything themselves. They said if I didn't disappear, my life would be ruined. So I had no choice but to cut off all contact. I left behind my friends, my plans, my whole life, all because of a lie. Then one day, my great-uncle pulled up to take me away. No warm goodbyes. Just silence. And with that, I was sent off like an exile. Since that day, I haven't heard a single word from my family. Not from my friends either. I had to rebuild my life from scratch. Living with my great-uncle was just as miserable as I'd feared. The man had a mean streak a mile wide. He didn't know the details about why I was kicked out, but the fact that I had been was enough for him. He held it over me every chance he got. He'd mock me, make jabs, and always act like letting me stay there was some huge favor even though I knew my parents were sending him money every month. He had a nasty temper, so I had to tiptoe around him constantly. But after the first few weeks, something inside me just snapped. I realized there was no use crying over what had already happened. My parents had abandoned me, and I was banned from contacting anyone from my old life. I had no safety net left. All I could do was move forward. I knew college was off the table. I'd been accepted into the school I wanted, but there was no money to make it happen now. So I started applying for jobs instead. After a few weeks of sulking, I pulled myself together and began going to interviews. Eventually, I landed a job working in a warehouse. The pay wasn't great, and the work was physically exhausting. But when I got that first paycheck, it was the first little light at the end of a dark tunnel. I used the money to move out of my great-uncle's house. I didn't even tell him I was leaving, figured he'd see it as good riddance anyway. Thankfully, I met a couple of guys at work who were around my age. They were broke like me, and trying to figure out life one day at a time. We hit it off, and the three of us decided to pool our money and rent a small apartment together. That's how I finally got out of that miserable house. I've been living with those same guys ever since, going on 3 years now. We've become like family. After those first few months in the warehouse, the three of us realized we couldn't keep grinding like that forever. We were always exhausted. So we started looking for better jobs, keeping each other motivated. Since then, we've bounced through a bunch of different gigs, just trying to find our footing. We've managed to save a little money along the way, and now all three of us share a dream: we want to go to college. For real this time. My friends have been through their own share of struggles too, but that's a story for another day. Right now, life's finally starting to turn around for me. I've got a steady job in sales, and I'm actually making a decent living. Lately, I've been thinking about reapplying to college and giving my education another shot. Both of my roommates, those same friends I moved in with after everything fell apart, are doing well too. In fact, not long ago, the three of us upgraded to a bigger apartment in a much better neighborhood. Life's been slowly falling into place. But of course, just when things start looking up for me, my family decides it's the perfect time to reappear. As I mentioned before, I haven't had any contact with them for the past 3 years. So when I got an email from my dad a few days ago, I was caught completely off guard. I don't use social media anymore, haven't since the day I left, mostly because that was one of the strict rules my parents laid down when they kicked me out. I was terrified they'd twist the story or drag my name through the mud if I broke any of their conditions, so I followed their rules to a T. But I've had the same email address this whole time. I never changed it, never blocked them. Not because I was waiting to hear from them, honestly, I never thought I would, but just because I didn't see the point in making the effort to erase people who had already erased me. So when that email from my dad popped up, I was shocked. He basically wrote a long apology, saying he was sorry for everything that happened over the last few years. He asked for my address and phone number so we could talk properly, and he included his own contact information in case I wanted to reach out first. Turns out, the reason he was even reaching out at all was because Jade, yeah, the same Jade who ruined my life, had finally come clean. She told her dad the truth about what really happened. And it wasn't because she suddenly grew a conscience, not exactly. She's dying. Jade was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It's aggressive, and from what I read in that email, the outlook isn't good. She's been battling it for 8 months now, but her health is going downhill fast. Even though she's still going through treatment, the doctors don't seem hopeful. She's on her deathbed, and I guess somewhere in the middle of all that, guilt caught up with her. She admitted to her father that she flat out lied about what happened that night. And once my uncle found out, he went to my parents, which is what led to the email from my dad. As for Jade? Well, karma caught up with her in more ways than one. After stealing my college fund and flipping my whole life upside down, she didn't even use the money the way she was supposed to. Instead of going for her master's degree like she said she would, she decided she needed a gap year to travel, explore the world, find herself. She blew through more than half of the money in that 1 year, living the high life. And when she got back, she had barely anything left. Still, she didn't change her ways. She kept spending, bought herself an apartment, and continued to live way beyond her means, no job, no plan. When she ran out of cash, she turned to my parents again, asking for more. But her dad finally put his foot down and threatened to cut her off completely if she took another dime from them. So, without the money for school and no motivation to work, she gave up on college entirely. She still had a bit of money left at that point, enough to try and start over, but instead of using it wisely, she wasted what was left. She didn't look for a job until about a year ago, and just when she finally started working, she was diagnosed with cancer and had to quit. Now she's selling off the apartment and everything else she bought because she needs the money for treatment. And I'm not gonna lie, when I finished reading all of that, a part of me felt satisfied. I know that might sound cold, but she didn't need enemies. She was her own worst enemy all along. After reading the email, I didn't know what to do right away. So I turned to the only people I trusted, my friends. It also meant I finally had to tell them the real story. Up until then, they only knew the watered-down version. I had told them that I'd been kicked out after some disagreements with my parents, but I'd never explained what really went down. That night, I laid it all out for them, the false accusation, the way my parents took Jade's side without a second thought, how they exiled me and forced me to cut off everyone I'd ever known. I told them about the threats, the silence, the loneliness, all of it. They were stunned. I could see it in their faces, they could barely believe what I was saying. And when I was done, they looked at me and said, "There's no way we'd forgive our parents if they did that to us." That hit hard. Coming from the only real family I have left, it meant something. If they had just said, "You don't owe them anything," maybe I would have brushed it off. But they went further, they told me I needed to speak up. They were right. I've been living in fear for 3 years. Fear of what people would think. Fear of the lie Jade told. Fear of my own family. But the truth is, I didn't do anything wrong, and I've lost too much time and too much of my life because of that lie. So if I want to reclaim my life, I need to tell the real story. And I decided I would. Before I did anything publicly, I messaged the phone number my dad had left in the email. I told him straight up, I'm going to share the truth. People deserve to know what actually happened. I didn't care that Jade was dying. She destroyed my life, and now I was taking it back. I already had proof, screenshots of his email, his admission that Jade confessed. That was all I needed. I could post about it. I could go back on social media. I didn't need anyone's permission. But I guess my dad misunderstood my message. Maybe he thought I was asking for his approval. Because now, he, my mom, and even my uncle won't stop blowing up my phone message after message, call after call. After I told my dad I planned to post the truth, my phone didn't stop buzzing. My parents and even my uncle were suddenly blowing up my inbox and messages, practically begging me not to go through with it. They said Jade had suffered enough, she was in pain, her health was rapidly declining, and she was already facing her karma. They pleaded with me not to punish her more than life already had. They didn't want me to go public because they said it would destroy her reputation. And, apparently, they thought I could just quietly come back into everyone's lives without ever explaining where I'd been or why I disappeared for 3 whole years. As if nobody would ask questions. And sure, maybe I could do that, but the thing is, I don't want to. Jade stole 3 years from me. 3 years of my youth. 3 years of peace. Even my friends, the only people who truly stood by me, said it was completely fair for me to speak up. I wasn't doing it to get even. I wasn't trying to ruin Jade. I just wanted the truth out there. People deserved to know what had actually happened. And honestly, it's hard to think of many other believable reasons for someone to vanish off the face of the earth for that long. I'm not planning to move back to the city or anything, I'm content where I am now, but I do miss the people I left behind. I miss my old friends. I miss the few relatives who were genuinely kind to me. They deserve the truth. Still, all the messages from my parents and uncle made me hesitate. They kept saying Jade was in really bad shape and pleading with me to keep everything quiet. That was the only thing holding me back. But then I asked myself, what if I did it anyway? What if I just told the truth right now, regardless of what condition she was in? Update 1, I did it. I sat with the idea for a while. Talked it through with my friends again and again. And each time, they told me the same thing, Jade and my family stole 3 years of your life, and you lived in fear the entire time. You didn't deserve that. They were right. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. About getting my story back. And knowing I had the support of people around me, people who actually cared, helped me take the leap. Last night, I posted the full story. Everything. Why I'd been gone. Why I'd lost touch. What actually happened. The lie Jade told. The way my parents turned on me. The years of silence. All of it. And let me tell you, the response was overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in years, old friends, childhood buddies, distant cousins, they all reached out. They told me they had missed me. That they had been wondering what happened to me. That they were glad I was okay. Some of them even told me they had tried to reach out during the early months after I disappeared, but my parents shut them down. They told everyone I needed time to heal from something traumatic, and that I wanted space. So people gave me that space, thinking they were respecting my wishes, when really, my parents had just wanted to bury the truth. Several of my relatives and friends said they had asked about me multiple times, but my parents never gave them any answers. Some were even told not to try contacting me. It honestly brought tears to my eyes to know that people hadn't forgotten about me. That they had waited patiently, hoping I'd return someday. That they still cared. Even more validating was how many people said they had always found Jade a bit off. Shady, even. But hearing the full truth? It floored them. Even for her, this was a new low. As for my parents and uncle? Radio silence. Not a single word yet. And I'm hoping it stays that way. I have nothing left to say to them. Now that I've spoken my truth, I feel lighter, freer. Like a massive weight has finally been lifted off my chest. No regrets. Sharing my story was the right decision. Update 2. It's been a couple of days since I made the post, and yesterday, my parents finally reached out. Not to apologize again. Not to make things right. Nope, they just wanted to let me know how disappointed they were. They told me that all they ever asked of me was to let sleeping dogs lie. That I should have made up some excuse for being gone, instead of airing everything publicly. Because apparently, Jade deserved some peace in her final days. They said that after I shared the truth, Jade lost all her friends. Nobody in the family wants anything to do with her now. As if that's my fault. Even now, they're more worried about her pain than what I went through. And that's exactly why their so-called apology would never be enough. I told them I didn't care about their disappointment because the truth is, they had disappointed me. Again and again. On every level. If Jade deserves sympathy because she's dying, then where was my sympathy when I was 18? When I was thrown out of my home and forced to live with someone I feared? I didn't get peace. I didn't get mercy. At least I'm telling the truth. Jade lied. And for 3 whole years, she lived her life while I had to disappear. Now, I'm done letting them make me feel guilty. I told my parents never to contact me again. The only people they should be ashamed of are themselves. And after I sent that message, I finally blocked them. Something I should have done years ago, but back then I was too scared. Too lost. But not anymore. Speaking up has given me the closure I needed. And I don't feel obligated to deal with them ever again. Whatever expectations they had of me, they can shove them. Update 3. This past weekend, I finally did it. I went back to visit my old friends and some of my extended family. It had been 3 years, and honestly, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I took my roommates with me. Mostly for emotional support, but honestly, they're more like brothers at this point. I wanted them to meet the people I used to know and love. It was amazing. Everyone welcomed me back with open arms. One of my old friends even insisted I stay at their place instead of a hotel. Actually, all of them did. They were offended I even considered paying for a room when I had a dozen people ready to take me in like family. Right now, we're all crashing at one friend's house. The laughs, the food, the conversations, it's like time rewound in the best way. My heart is full in a way I didn't think was possible anymore. I've also had the chance to reconnect with a few relatives, and they told me something that really hit me hard in a good way. They said they've completely cut off my parents, my uncle, and even Jade. They want nothing to do with any of them ever again. And hearing that meant more than I can say. Because in the end, the people who matter always find their way back to you. And I'm just so grateful that I'm surrounded by people who still believe in what's right. People who didn't forget about me. People who love me better than my own parents ever did.